Hello and welcome to the Sustainability Strategy Summit. Today's interview is with Tom Content, Executive Director of the Citizens Utility Board, or CUB. Hi, Tom. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for involving me in this. Thanks for getting the perspective of CUB. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So why don't you start just by telling us a little bit about you and how you landed with CUB?
Sure. So my background is actually in journalism. So I spent most of my career writing news stories and covering business, and I ended up covering utilities and ended up creating actually a sustainable business beat at the Journal Sentinel, focused on the drivers of sustainability as well as the clean energy transition, and then also covering energy and utilities at the same time. But 4 years ago, I got an opportunity to join CUB, and so what instead of writing stories for the consumers and businesses of Wisconsin, I'm basically their advocate now. So what CUB does is we're the consumer advocate for the small business customers of the monopoly utilities in the state. So that's your We Energies, Wisconsin Public Service, Alliant, Xcel, Madison Gas and Electric, as well as municipal utilities.
Okay.
And so what we do is we're there at the Public Service Commission in a monopoly system. The Public Service Commission, which is the state agency that regulates utilities, is the one that actually sets the rates and approves the projects that the utilities are proposing. But we're there to say, hey, not so fast. Don't build everything the utilities want, because our prices could get out of control. And so our focus is on keeping rates affordable and on making sure that policies are fair for customers. And so from a sustainability perspective, if you think of sustainability as that three-legged stool: economics, environment, social. So we really operate on the economic, and with our focus on affordability for low-income customers, we're also focused on the side. So we leave the environmental side to the environmental groups and others. But as we've seen with the recent events, even the utilities are talking about decarbonization now.
Yeah, great. So yeah, let's talk about the bigger picture for a minute. And then we can kind of talk about what's happening at the state level. But
Sure.
so sort of, where is the nation at an energy policy level, and sort of what's the conversation around clean energy transition? And then sort of like, what should businesses be aware of, or what's going on that businesses should be paying attention to?
Sure. Well, the big picture nationally is really an economic story more so than a kind of government policy story. It's the changing economics. The utility system was kind of a staid, some would say stodgy, not changing very much industry for probably about 100 years. And then over the last 5 years and probably the next 15 years, we're seeing some of the most dramatic changes we've ever seen. And and that's driven by the economics of natural gas, the economics of solar, the growing affordability of solar and wind, the increasing the unfavorable economics of coal, as well as all the other aspects of coal that are in focus now as part of the transition. And so it's really a story of dramatic change already. But now you obviously have an administration that wants to facilitate the clean energy transition. How that happens, we don't know yet, but we're seeing some discussion out of Washington of, the path for more transmission lines to transport renewable energy. That's one of the policies that's come up. Certainly a lot of talk about electric vehicles and more incentives for electric vehicles too.
Great. So then at the state level, Wisconsin, where are utilities today in this conversation? So what's happening now? And again, what should businesses in the state be aware of or be thinking of?
Yeah, and this is something we're watching as the Wisconsin. We're the only advocate out there for the small business customers and the residential customers. So we're really keyed in on what's going on at the state level. And you're seeing the utilities make dramatic changes. You've seen every year with their sustainability reports, they're making new commitments. And by now, all 5 big utilities have committed to net zero emissions by 2050, to phasing out coal. Over some already, and some it's just underway. But I think the policy issues attendant to that are really critical from a customer point of view, because there are ways to get to a cleaner energy future, but there are ways to do it that'll cost too much for customers. And so one of the keys to that is the shutdown and the retirement of coal plants, and how you do that. If you do that in a way that's fair for everybody, you don't overburden the customers. Our customers are already paying the second highest rates in the Midwest and the top 15 in the country in terms of prices when it comes to electric rates. And so what our issue is trying to make sure that the utilities aren't continuing to profit from coal plants long after they're shut down. And we've made some progress on that issue in the last few years, both with We Energies. We were able to lower the cost for the Pleasant Prairie plant that shut down a few years ago through a refinancing. Known as, and also it's known as securitization, but we just call it's kind of like a mortgage refinancing. And then just recently there's another coal plant in Sheboygan, Edgewater, that Alliant owns. And they're going to, in a commitment with CUB and other customer groups, Alliant is going to restructure the payments on that so that they're going to be near-term savings for customers. And that's critical because we're seeing so much change so quickly. Thousands of megawatts of solar have been proposed just over the last couple of years, utility scale solar by the utilities. But every time the utilities put steel in the ground, whatever kind of technology it is, that causes rate pressure on our rates. So finding near-term savings on this Sheboygan, tens of millions of dollars of savings on this coal plant in Sheboygan will help ease that transition.
Great. So you mentioned that we pay high rates in the Midwest, the second highest in the Midwest. Why is that?
I think we had a couple of things. Some states moved more quickly toward renewable energy, for instance, Iowa. And from an economic point, there's obviously the clean energy benefits and environmental benefits of clean energy. But from a cost perspective, one of the benefits of wind and solar is that there's no fuel cost. So that every time you're bringing in coal from Wyoming or Pennsylvania or wherever, you got to ship it here. There's a transportation cost. There's the cost of mining it. Same thing with natural gas, the pipeline system, and getting the gas here, because we don't have coal or gas in the state. So it all has to be imported. So when the fuel cost is free, that helps favor the economics. And I think one of the other challenges Wisconsin has, we don't really have a coordinated system of planning for our growth and how we transition forward. And this lack of planning has contributed to higher rates too, because we've ended up overbuilding and sometimes building the wrong technologies. We, as a state, Wisconsin was continuing to invest and build coal plants at a time when other states were already shifting away. Now we're shifting away, but now we still have some not brand new, but one coal plant that just opened in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Great. So again, like, what part of this conversation matters, to businesses, and what does this sort of transition mean for them, if anything?
I think it's just a question of on when you're thinking about the bottom line, that's where we're focused a lot, is making sure overpaying for their energy. Certainly from a business perspective, you have ways to kind of take matters into your own hand through, energy savings, through reduce your own footprint and reduce your own prices at the same time. The price you pay at the same time, whether that's, if you haven't changed out your light bulbs to LEDs yet, then that's overdue. But other changes you can take. But also there's a role for businesses to play, we think, in being part of what we call, energy democracy, which if we have this monopoly system where the PSC is basically setting the prices, the PSC only can respond to the voices it hears. It can't respond to the people who, if people don't show up, just like with elections, if people don't show up to vote, you don't have a voice. Right. And so we encourage people and businesses to get involved, kind of on that macro level, just to really read up on what's happening and try to find their own voice and give their own perspective on things.
Yeah. Okay, great. Interesting. So, I know you've mentioned the utilities in the state, and I know that, kind of they're each working on their own goals and decarbonization, as you mentioned. And I know at the state level, we're kind of planning for a clean energy transition. Who are the players in all of this, and how does it fit together?
Sure. So so under Governor Evers, the state is being active, but it takes the different forms. So there's a state office of sustainability and clean energy, which is kind of working to implement some of the recommendations of Lieutenant Governor Barnes' climate task force, and that is their Evers had an executive order basically requiring that agency to develop a clean energy plan. So that's a broad-based plan. CUB's been on an advisory group with that, as well as a lot of equity stakeholders and diverse stakeholders trying to make sure that we're considering the impacts on communities of color and low income as we plan a cleaner energy future. So that's one element. And then the utilities themselves all have their own plans, but each utility has its own plan. And then the Public Service Commission has its own role. They've launched a big investigation just this year, called the Roadmap to Net Zero. And so they're trying to see what role they can play in trying to push things forward in a way that promotes affordability and reliability and safety all at the same time. But the problem with all that, that's a lot of stuff, right? That's a lot of different things going on at the same time. And those pieces don't always fit together. And as I said before, I think one of the challenges for Wisconsin is that we don't plan in a more cohesive way. Other states like Minnesota, actually the state has the ability to actually approve the plans of the long-term plans of the state, of the utilities.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that CUB has called for. And in our comments to the PSC just this spring, we're urging that the state have a better planning process, because we think that is a way to have a more cost-effective energy future. If you think about it, there are a lot of ways to get from point A to point B. You pick up your phone and you put point A, point B in there, and you see 3 different options.
Yeah.
But if the utilities have their way, it's just their way. It's their way or the highway sometimes. So what we want to make sure is that there's a voice for things that aren't just building more, because building more puts that pressure on our rates. So we want there to be much more room for new technology, energy efficiency, distributed generation, things that empower customers to take control of their own energy costs, whether that's a small business or a big business, or a homeowner or a renter.
Yeah, I mean, that seems really important, both from the broader spectrum, the state level, but also, businesses and utilities, right? As we try to decarbonize or reduce carbon, to have more control over the efficiency gains or their own stake in it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that does seem pretty important.
It's so
pretty
critical.
important.
Yeah, so critical.
Yeah. So, you did talk a little bit about businesses' role in this and being proactive in terms of implementing energy efficiency measures and whatnot. Is there anything else that they can do, sort of, or how can they maybe directly support the work of CUB?
I think what they can do, first of all, what they can do on their own is just realize that the world is changing quickly. And so if you maybe looked at an energy technology for your business even 3 years ago, you might want to look at it again, because the economics are changing pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Whether that's for energy storage or for electrifying your fleet of vehicles, or looking at routing software to boost fuel economy. And then the other thing, so the economics of the technologies are changing, and then the ways to pay for it are changing. For instance, with PACE financing, there's a way solar companies are being more creative in kind of a rent-to-own model, and for solar panels, and for homeowners, green mortgages are emerging. So there are a lot of different new things that if you just kind of dismiss something even 3 years ago, you may want to look at it again. The Tesla Powerwall for energy storage is one product. Now Generac here in Wisconsin is getting involved in solar and storage for homes and businesses. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see the change happen so quickly. And then, CUB has small business members, and we have a small business membership program that we encourage businesses to get involved in, kind of helping CUB represent them at the PSC by becoming a small business member. And what we can do, we are also available to consult or just offer suggestions or analysis of your energy costs just to try to get a sense for some suggestions. How are you fully taking advantage of the Focus on Energy program, things like that, and even intersecting with the utilities. We had one Milwaukee area business last year that during the pandemic Bounce Milwaukee was continuing to get charged for its energy use, even though the business had shut down because of the pandemic. And it turned out that the We Energy software was continuing to assume that it was running as normal, even though they couldn't read the meter. So, they ended up having to reach out to We Energies and the PSC, and CUB on their behalf also reached out to the utility. And We Energies ended up saying, oh, during the pandemic, we're going to reprogram that software, so it's not doing that. So that's just one of the ways that we interface on behalf of the small business customers.
Yeah. That is so interesting to me, because my assumption is that, our rates in our bill, right, is directly reflective of actual usage. And so that's not always the case. Right.
No, it happens at homes too. If they're unable to get a reading, more of the meters across the state are automated now, and they're able to be read without a meter reader walking into the yard. But so that's a little less of an issue than it used to be. But that had been a big issue where if they aren't able to monitor it for a period of time, then they maybe get an estimated bill, and then it catches up after a few months once they're back and get a up-to-date reading. So yeah. But that changed. The pandemic changed everything. If the business is completely shut down, there's very little energy being used, right?
Right. So, no lights on. No, I know Bounce does. Pizza and, have kitchen equipment and whatnot. So yeah, I'm sure that affected their pricing quite a bit.
Sure.
Well, that's great. I have a few thoughts here. So, yeah. So just trying to think if there's anything else on that before I move to the next question. Well, I remember. So that's a huge case, an example for businesses paying attention to the measurements, right? Like, so often, especially with energy, you get a bill, you pay the bill, like you're not actively looking at
that. So true.
And that's so true with businesses, because the bills go to finance, and it's usually an operations team, or depending on the business, that's in charge of the energy consumption. So there's a disconnect there. And then if you're not managing or measuring that and paying attention to it on an ongoing regular basis, it seems like a huge opportunity potentially for some cost savings just by paying attention.
Yeah, it's that old adage, you can't control what you don't measure, right? So if you're watching it closely and you're measuring it and you're tracking it, you're more likely to be able to take concerted action to say, what can we do differently to reduce this, right? Or to keep it in check.
Yeah. And just to your point about small businesses, I know larger businesses tend to have more resources and potentially paying more attention to that. And just a reminder for the small businesses that it's equally important for you as well.
Yes, exactly. And I'd encourage small businesses that haven't taken advantage of contacting Focus on Energy, which is we're all paying through a very small portion of our electric bills and natural gas bills go to support Focus on Energy. And it's there to help us. So they have consultants that are ready to say, what sector are you in? Oh, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So definitely take advantage of starting with the Focus on Energy website, but reaching out through their 800 number and getting a consultant to swing by your shop and say, you might want to think about X, Y, and Z to reduce your footprint and your prices, help your bottom line at the same time.
Great. That is really a great program. And we are, I think, going to bring somebody in for our conference in December to kind of talk more about that program and what they're offering
Super.
currently, because I know it's
It does
evolved
it does
and
evolve, and that's
Mhm.
good. That'll be there, and they tend to freshen the offerings toward the end of the year or at the beginning of the year sometimes. So that should be good.
Great.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah. So, all right. I think last question is, I know it's on a lot of businesses' mind from a carbon and policy standpoint. What options are out there to address carbon reduction, and which ones, from your perspective and sort of what you're seeing, might be able to grow some legs?
Oh, sure. So yeah, this one is always hard to predict. And at Cub, we just kind of we see what we're involved in the rate cases based on what the current system is, and that the current system is there's not a price on carbon, but but there is in certain states, right? So at the
Mhm.
national level, we're in a different spot than we were a year ago. Now that the U.S. has joined the Paris Climate Accord again. But whether Congress gets involved from here is still a question. Clearly, the economic case and the growing appetite for some of the trends we talked about earlier, plus the growing appetite for ESG or sustainability investing, has moving the
Mhm.
utilities down this path much faster than they were before. But the challenge is what happens next. Um, what we're seeing in some states, and both on the East Coast and the West Coast, is they do have a carbon market, basically a regional carbon markets, and whether that comes to the Midwest is a question. Whether the Biden appointees on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission out in Washington kind of try to set up a carbon pricing system for the electric power grid side of things has
Mhm.
been discussed. That's another possibility. When I go to conferences nationally talking about, the kind of the just transition and moving in a fair and equitable way toward the clean energy future, I think the two big levers that are talked about a lot are carbon pricing. So that's what we just talked
Mhm.
about. But the second one is the one that we're very much involved in here in Wisconsin, and that's that securitization or refinancing
Mm.
of retiring coal plants. That's one
Okay.
of the biggest tools we have, and the challenge is where Wisconsin allows this tool to be used, but we can only use it on a portion of the coal plant because it's only being used to refinance the pollution controls on the coal plants. And so the governor proposed legislation as part of the state budget that would allow the entire coal plant to be used, to be refinanced. Then you're talking about paying 8% interest, and bringing that down to 2%, under 2% in some cases, with like the Pleasant Prairie example I talked about earlier. And just that savings alone is, I think over 60 to 80 million dollars just on
Oh,
one
wow.
plant. So if you can see, if we could securitize or refinance more of these older plants as we're shutting them down, it would really be a big lever in Wisconsin's favor, in customers and small businesses' favor, um, as we look to make this transition
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
affordable for everyone. So that's something to watch. There could be more legislation trying to move that issue forward. Other states from Kansas to Colorado have passed, red states and blue states have passed this kind of legislation. So we're interested in seeing if it can happen here in a purple state.
Great. In a purple state. Yeah. Yeah, great. Well, and it's what's coming up for me is so last year at our conference, which was virtual because of COVID,
Yeah,
we had Alliant Energy as a keynote. It was Barbara Trishami, and
cool.
she talked about Alliant Energy sort of plans. And I know she mentioned the securitization, and I don't know that a lot of the audience understood what that meant. So thanks
Right.
for explaining that. And I just want to point listeners to, if they want to, listen to that keynote, it's available in our member site. You can go back and listen to what Barbara had to say from the utility perspective on kind of all of these things and what they're thinking and planning for going forward. So, and also just we do have MG&E and Daryl Power as members of WSBC. So I know, from conversations and being involved with them over the years that they've been really grappling with this conversation around how do they make the transition and how do they, each one is kind of a little different business model and serving kind of different customers. How can they provide also what the business customer is asking when they're asking, can you help us with, carbon reduction or energy reduction, and how does that partnership work? So yes. I know there's a lot of angles of the conversation going on. And I love your point about just having a better planning process.
Yeah, no, I think we really need that. Other states have really led the way on that, and we've kind of been behind the 8 ball on that. And a point on small business, since you brought up, we did collaborate with Alliant on a rate settlement that's pending before the PSC now that will lower the cost for that Edgewater plant that I mentioned in the near term. And then on the small business side, MG&E has a program, a renewable program offering for small businesses, and we're trying to see if also work for utilities as we're coming out of the pandemic to see if there's any incentives we can build in for small businesses that may have shut down or are struggling to really make a comeback. And so that's an issue we're also working on coming out of the pandemic, but nothing to announce yet, but we're hoping to make progress there too.
Great. Well, and you mentioned the PSC several times, which is the Public Service Commission. Is there, and you mentioned getting involved there. So how can somebody listen, have a voice towards the PSC?
Sure. So certainly we have a newsletter, an email newsletter, and a blog that we put out that talks about some of the issues. And then certainly the PSC has a portal for public comments on their website for every single case that's involved with them, whether it's a new solar project or a rate case or the new natural gas proposals that some of the utilities are proposing right now too. So there's basically on the front of the PSC website, there's a public comment button where you can click there and then get involved that way. But we're happy to have folks reach out to CUB at cubwi.org and contact us to find out more.
Great. I will put these resources in the email that gets sent out with your interview. So folks don't necessarily have to scramble and look for those, or if they didn't catch it, we'll include it in the email. So awesome, wonderful information, Tom. Thank you so much for being here. It was great chatting with you today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a great opportunity, and I encourage everybody to keep staying involved.
Yes, exactly.